week I took a tour of Bastyr University. Some of you know that next Saturday, in 6 days, our church is going on a big retreat. It's free, there will be food, you should all come. But I went down there to learn more about the space. So I got to see the classrooms. There are beautiful medicinal gardens with a little path that you can walk to massage your feet. And one of the things that I got to see while I was there was the chapel. Bastyr University, before it was a college for Chinese medicine and natural healing, was the site of the Roman Catholic Seminary here in Washington, St. Edward's Seminary. And so this chapel reflects the values of the 1950s Roman Catholic Church. It's covered in saints and apostles and maps of different parts of the world. The ceiling has different images of the church over the several thousand years. At the back, there's a giant window of the story of Jesus encountering Thomas, where he invites Thomas to touch his wounds, and it says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and have still believed." And there were millions of Bible stories and saints reflected in this chapel. I hope you get to see it. But what struck me more than any one of those particular images was what the images in the chapel, in the church, in the center of this community were made from. Almost everything I saw was either stained glass, especially the windows, or a mosaic. You know, you've seen mosaics, little tiny pieces of glass that are put together like a puzzle to make a bigger picture. The entire chapel, it seemed to me, although beautiful, was formed out of things that had been shattered. That window at the back was formed of little shattered pieces of glass assembled in an iron frame. The mosaics on the ceiling and on the wall were even tinier pieces of glass that had been glued together, pieced together in ways sometimes that I wasn't anticipating. There is beauty sometimes, I was reminded, when God puts things back together after they've been smashed apart. In the first scripture we heard this morning from the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah is weeping for the lives of people who have had things smashed apart. Jeremiah is often called the weeping prophet, and the whole book, including this part that you heard this morning, is him weeping over his people that have been sent far away into exile. They're living under empire, and it doesn't look like they're going to be going back home anytime soon. And so Jeremiah laments, God is taking too long, and there doesn't seem to be a reason why. He says the harvest has passed, the summer is ended, and still we are not yet saved. Jeremiah's heart has been shattered. He says, "For the brokenness of my people, I have been broken." And his body has been transformed into what feels like an ever-flowing fountain of tears. He can't stop crying. He says, "Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears, so that I could weep day and night for those of my people who have been slain." In Jeremiah's little corner of the universe, thousands of years ago, it seems that the people will not listen, that people will not change, and there seems to be no end to the people suffering, no end in sight. Maybe you can empathize with Jeremiah. Maybe you right now are lamenting a nation that seems to have turned so far away from the good and the beautiful and the true and turned instead toward the forces of its own self-destruction. Maybe you're weeping day and night, or maybe you've just grown numb to all of your sadness. I know I have moments where I'm so numb, where All I can do is put one foot in front of another. Just try and keep going. And to a certain extent, that makes sense. Despair, it is said, is a luxury that's not afforded to many. If you are in the position of just trying to keep going, just trying to get what you need to make it through the day, and all of your energy is being spent on just surviving, you don't have time for despair. It's a luxury. But I'm not sure that I would characterize the words of Jeremiah as despair. I think instead that these are words of lament. When we lament, when we let our tears flow freely, we just keep going, even if we're afraid that those tears will never stop. When we lament, we cry out to God. It wasn't supposed to be this way. It was supposed to have gotten better by now. When we lament, we let ourselves, even for just a minute, we let ourselves see fully the way things are and to lift up our broken hearts, our broken lives, our broken world to God. Lament is a spiritual practice too, just like joy. And it teeters on that line between despair and apathy. Lament is right in the middle between caring too much and caring not at all. I've mentioned to you over the past couple years, some of you know that I do work when I'm not here with a group called NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, that works with people and their families who are living with mental health conditions. And this group has a really brilliant way, I think, of capturing the difference between despair, where we're totally overcome by our own sorrow, and lament, which can actually move us toward change. NAMI tells folks when they have meetings of groups of people who are recovering from mental illness or families of people who are recovering from these illnesses, that recovery has 3 different stages. When folks are first diagnosed with an illness, when they first experience a new set of symptoms, all of their energy goes into dealing with catastrophe. And after a while, as life goes on, they enter the second stage, which is just learning to cope with their new reality. And once everything is kind of stabilized enough, and folks have coping skills, they tend to move into the stage of advocacy, of working for a better world, not only for themselves, but for other folks who suffer the same kind of problems. 3 stages: dealing with catastrophe, learning to cope, and moving toward advocacy. As you think about your own laments, whatever that is that's breaking your heart right now, I wonder, which one of those stages would you say that you are in? Dealing with catastrophe, learning to cope, moving toward advocacy. My answer to that question changes depending on what time of day you ask me, but I think it's a worthy question to ask. What stage of lament am I in? I am not an artist. Those of you who have seen my drawings or paintings can attest to that fact. I am not an artist, but when I was looking at all of those mosaics and stained glass windows in the chapel this week, I was reminded that the first stage of making something beautiful is not installing the finished piece of art. It's not even putting all those little pieces of glass together in an iron frame. The first stage of making that beautiful art is cutting and breaking and grinding and smashing all of the glass from the way it used to be into what it's going to be later. Before we can align all of our resources towards making something new and beautiful. The first stage we have to go through is falling completely apart. The gospel lesson you heard this morning tells the story of someone who has already experienced catastrophe, who is already starting to figure out how she's going to cope, and who is beginning to move into advocacy. There was a widow, Jesus tells his listeners, who pursued justice, coming over and over and over again to a corrupt judge, a judge that was so disconnected from reality that Scripture says he had no respect for God, and he had no respect for other human beings. The judge himself says that. He says in this Scripture, even though I have no respect for God and no respect for any other human beings, he's that self-aware. If he reminds you of any other leaders, there's nothing I can do about that. But this widow comes over and over and over to this corrupt judge, a judge who answers to no higher authority, a judge who insists, the widow insists that this judge does what is right on her behalf. We don't know what catastrophes this widow has endured. We don't know what coping mechanisms she's cobbled together for herself. But at this point in the story, we can see clearly a woman who is finding her voice and who is moving into advocacy for justice. Now, some interpretations of this passage look at this judge and they say the judge is the most powerful man in the story, therefore that person must be God. And I've always found that interpretation a little bit bewildering. If the judge describes himself as someone who has no respect for God, it doesn't make a lot of sense that that person is somehow God themselves. Seems more in keeping with the way Jesus tells stories other places in the Bible, where Jesus says something like, if even this person can do the right thing, how much more can God do? If even parents can give their children something good to eat, why would God not do the same thing? If even this judge, Jesus seems to be saying, if even this guy eventually does the right thing after someone advocates long enough and hard enough, then maybe it's okay if we pester God to do the same for the world that we love. I don't think God is a corrupt judge who doesn't care for anybody. That's not the God I know. Instead, I want to offer you a different image of God that I see in this story. What if, in this parable, what if the person who's most like God is not the corrupt, disrespectful judge? What if the person who's most like God is that persistent widow? Our God, the God I know, the God we worship, does seek justice. Our God seeks response from corruption, and our God grows impatient when no one seems to respond to that call. The God I know asks us over and over and over again to listen, to do what is right, and to change, and to love. And some of us, myself included, even if our hearts aren't quite ready to do what God is asking us, some of us will respond not because we've been fully converted, but because God has just worn us out with her pestering. God, the one who advocates for the poor, for the widowed, for the oppressed, God, this God can move us to acting our way into thinking more rightly, to doing justice, even before we think about what kind of justice we really want. The gift of wise nonprofits like NAMI, and the gift of wise prophetic prophets like Jesus and Jeremiah and so many others, their gift is that they demand advocacy. with full-throated anger and tears and clear calls to love the widow and the orphan and the stranger the way we love God, with all of our hearts, with all of our minds, with all of our souls, and with all of our strength. But within those calls to action, and they are many, within those calls to action is also a spaciousness that allows for tears. It allows for rest. It allows for a moment where we can breathe and take stock of where we are, of all that's been lost, of all that seems to be shattered before our eyes. Later in Jeremiah, for example, when he takes stock of the devastation of his people's exile, he takes a deep breath and he counsels them. He says, go ahead and plant gardens. Go ahead and build houses and seek the welfare of this strange place, even while you wish that this was not where we were. Because even as we trust in the ultimate restoration of God's justice, it's becoming clear, he says to his people, that this feeling of being strangers in a strange land, of being exiled from everything we know and trust and love, that feeling, that reality, it might take a while before things change. So get comfortable. It's going to be a while. I trust in the hope of resurrection, in a God who sees the suffering of the poor and the widowed and the stranger and the immigrant, a God who will act to bring justice. I trust this God with every fiber of my being, and I pray for patience, because I know that before resurrection comes dying, and before dying comes suffering, comes the breaking of beautiful colored glass into tiny pieces. Before the resurrection comes lament. And like it or not, I don't get to know how long it's going to take us to get from here to there. I don't know how long it's going to take. And yet, I trust in the hope of resurrection. That's the deal. So this week, I pray that you get a chance to lament like Jeremiah, if you need to. I pray that you get a chance to cry out for justice like that persistent widow. And I pray that like those artists who make those beautiful mosaics and stained glass windows, that you'll have a chance to sit with the broken shards of the way things used to be. Sit and look at those shards, those little pieces, for as long as you need to. There's no hurry. And I pray that piece by piece, however long it takes, slowly we can start to assemble all of those pieces back together into something new, something colorful, something beautiful, something that undeniably reflects the image of a God in whom we can trust, the image of a God who, even when we can't see, is always making all things